Maziacs by our beloved Dun Priestley is a great case study in just how fast things were moving in the early 80s. While America was nosediving into the great video game crash, Europe was pounding ahead without a care in the world. Games were being released by the bucket load, and with each new year, new innovations were taking hold. Maziacs released in 1983 and was very much dressed for the occasion. Piles of text on screen seems quaint now, but the in-game tutorial was an undeniably exciting prospect. It felt animated and alive and far more preferable to a younger player than sitting and reading a card inlay. It was also, according to Crash magazine, one of the first games on the spectrum to allow you to define the keys. Something as simple as the innovation of allowing the player to decide which buttons move the player character around seems like it should have been an obvious one from the beginning. But everything starts somewhere, and Maziacs, it seems, was one of the first stepping stones toward that standard. 1983 was moving fast though. For a start, I was born, so that was important, but something else was sitting on the horizon. Something that was about ready to blow the Spectrum crowd a new bumhole. A specific game with a specific noisy intro, another innovation, that showed us all a new level of coding genius. Bear that in mind then when we look at Crash's review of Maziacs on first release. Everything is very clear and colourful. The game has instant appeal because of its graphics. You are very well animated, tapping your feet when standing still, even squatting down in boredom if you don't move for a while. The Maziacs are also nicely done. They look and move in an evil way. If you encounter one, which you will, then the battle is fun to watch. Bound to be a success, said one reviewer. Plenty of appeal with lots to do and good animation. Helpful touches like the view facility can be a mixed blessing since you can't move while looking at the larger map, but the Maziacs can. Addictive, said another, and the total score sat at 82%, a respectable score in anyone's book. Maziacs itself is incredibly simple. A maze is randomly generated and you're tasked with finding the treasure and bringing it back home. On the way, you'll need to maintain your energy levels by eating what looks like seed bells? I'm not sure if our protagonist is part sparrow or something, but either way, that's what you do. Depending on the difficulty level, energy will be depleted for most things, from moving around to, on later levels, even just looking at your map, but especially when fighting, and you'll be doing a lot of fighting. Maziacs is named after the denizens that wander the halls themselves, and these guys are absolutely ruthless. In order to defeat them, you'll need a sword, which only lasts for one battle. This means you'll typically need to hotfoot it away from a Maziac to try and find one. If you do get into a bare-knuckle brawl with one of these things, be prepared to die. There is a small chance you'll survive, but it's certainly not something you want to rely on. To find your way to the treasure, you have some help, and again this varies per difficulty level. The prisoners you find along the walls can be used to direct you to the treasure, which is odd. I mean, you're not trying to rescue them in any way, you just walk up to them and say, "Excuse me mate, I know you're currently shackled to the wall and you've probably been here for weeks, but any chance you could point me in the direction of the gold?" You just leave these guys hanging there and they're more than happy to give you directions, marked out as a yellow path. This only lasts for a small amount of time before you need to go and ask someone else. However, it's lucky that literally all of these guys know the correct way. Outside of that, you've got view mode, which allows you to zoom out the map partially. Bear in mind that you can't move in this mode, but the enemies can. It's a simple game with a simple set of instructions, beautifully animated for its time with that patented Priestley charm, and a game that I absolutely loved as a kid. It was easy to pick up, it was easy to understand, and it was a thrill to finally beat. Even on replaying it now, I let out an audible gasp when I was lugging the treasure chest back home and this Maziac jumped out of the path ahead of me. Having to run away and find a sword before he could take me out was, after all this time, still an exciting event. But there are issues here. Controls can often feel unresponsive, there's terrible slowdown, the graphics are functional but samey, and the chances of you completing one of Maziac's levels is just as reliant on luck as it is on your own skill. You can start a maze off and just be instantly killed by a monster with no recourse to actually deal with it. This seems obvious, looking at the game from the standpoint of 2021, but it's interesting to look back at Crash magazine's second look at the game, this time 1 year later, and see how their opinions have changed. This large maze/adventure game still has plenty of appealing qualities, although perhaps the action seems a little on the slow side. Fights become long and boring instead of exciting. Moving graphics are detailed, but the maze is very uninteresting. This does seem to detract from the game, although it didn't when I first saw it. In retrospect, the game doesn't seem to be very colourful now. Key reactions are slow, unaddictive and boring, said one reviewer, and the others largely follow the same suit. From exciting and addictive to ugly and boring in the space of a year. From the craze of maze-based games and Pac-Man clones to platform games and Manic Miner clones in the space of a single year. Things were moving fast in the games scene, and it seemed that Maziacs was very quickly swept under the carpet. And it's largely unfair. Maziacs does what it does, and while there's certainly issues with the controls at times, and it's about as appealing to look at as a colourful spreadsheet, it's a surprisingly addictive spin of the wheel, even today. Will the maze generation favour you in this game, or will you be dead within minutes? Will you even manage to reach the treasure, and if so, should you take on one of the higher difficulties? And that's all Maziacs offers. It keeps things simple, and it can be difficult to judge the innovations it brought to the table when viewed from a distance such as this, especially if you didn't experience it at the time. But above all, it does, as mentioned, make a great case study of just how rapidly things were moving back then, when even a single year in the 80s could turn a critic's head and flip opinions to the polar opposite. Were Crash Magazine right to change their minds? Yes and no. The criticisms they have are definitely valid, but that doesn't stop Maziacs from being surprisingly compelling. Its simplicity makes it easy to pick up and play for a minute, and that minute can easily roll into 30. And if you've never gotten around to trying it, then I highly recommend you do, if only to see which version of Crash Magazine you align with. The one that was wowed by the game on first release, or the one tainted by even a year of innovation.